The Appalachian mountain range is one of the oldest on Earth. They began forming almost 500 million years ago, when Africa and North America collided during the continental drift. The pressure directed the range up from the crust, creating summits that once reached heights that could rival the Himalayas. Since then, this land has witnessed the fall of dinosaurs and the rise of humans. It has seen things that we can never imagine, and has memories of things that we will never understand. Over time, humans began to learn the land and discover the secrets and wisdom that it had to share. More importantly, they began to document what was happening as a way to pass the teachings along. The southern Appalachians are home to a developing number of sites that have been discovered which contain ancient petroglyphs. Many of these are only now being cataloged in the hopes of conserving them. If you travel high up into the Balsam Mountains of western North Carolina, there is a unique site that is sacred in the Cherokee religion. A large piece of soapstone jutting out from the remnants of cornfield that has hundreds of bizarre markings that are said to have been carved by a hair-covered giant. The Cherokee have long spoken of Judaculla, or, as some call him, Sulkalu. He gets his name from the appearance of his eyes. It translates to, he has them slanting, referring to the pupil which was slanted like a cat's. Judaculla was a being that roamed the earth long before man was even a thought. He was the guardian of the land and all of the life within it. When humans finally began to emerge, they did not yet know how to survive. So Judaculla was there to teach these new creatures all the things they would need to know. Legend holds that Judaculla was a staggeringly ugly giant, standing over 7 feet tall with thick hair covering his body. His hands had 7 fingers tipped with sharp claws and his feet had 7 toes. Despite the monstrous appearance, he was heavily active in the lives of the Cherokee and had even taken a human woman to be his wife. It was here, on this large piece of soapstone, that the Cherokee believed Judaculla left his teachings. There are an estimated 1,548 individual carvings that many believe are a map of local resources and hunting laws. Archaeologists estimate that the markings were carved throughout the late Woodland to late Mississippian periods, about 500 to 1700 AD. Over the years, the Judaculla rock has been damaged by weathering, erosion, vandalism, and chalkings. The Parker family, who have owned the property where the rock sits since the 1800s, are the caretakers. The rock, and 1 acre around it, was donated to the county in 1959 by Miles Parker. The family has since donated 100 acres of land for the historical site in 2011, so that anyone can visit and cast their wonders upon its mysteries. Just a few miles away to the southwest, along the Blue Ridge Parkway, rests the sinister-looking peak known as Devil's Courthouse. The trail to the top is a strenuous, half-mile trek, but the reward is worth the effort. It is here, hidden in a cave, deep within the mountain, that Judaculla calls home. And atop the summit is the judgment seat where he observes his kingdom. On a clear day, you can see North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, making it one of the most beautiful and most visited sites in the state. It is a habitat for numerous rare species of high-altitude plants left over from the last glacial period, and animals such as the peregrine falcon. The legend says that, one day, a hunting party had entered Judaculla's land, trespassing and violating the laws they had set down by hunting without first receiving his blessing. He was so enraged that he leapt from his throne at Devil's Courthouse, landing on the soapstone with enough force to leave an imprint of his seven-fingered hand upon the stone. He then gave chase to the hunters, frightening them away. When early European settlers arrived in the area, some of them had reportedly encountered a beast that they had called the Indian Satan. Judaculla's handprint has also been found on other boulders throughout the Cherokee lands, and there are at least 12 locations that make reference to his name. To the Cherokee, he was no devil, but a protector of the land, whose wishes and boundaries should be respected. To others who had crossed paths with him, he was something that frightened them and had given a face to the boogeyman that haunted their dreams. Today, the modern world has largely moved out of the woodlands and has forgotten many of the old stories that were handed down. Being in the forest these days is more for recreation than the struggle for survival that it used to be. However, more and more people have been venturing back into the forest in search of wild game, adventure, spiritual healing, and even beginning new lives. With a growing number of people re-entering the forest, it isn't long before the wild starts to introduce itself once again. And sometimes it might not be what you'd expect. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO, currently lists a total of 106 reports in their database for North Carolina. Many of these reports take place within the areas of legend and feature encounters with a giant, ugly, hair-covered creature.
I've got families that are 5th to 8th generation that I keep in touch with, and they have sightings and stories in their families that they don't share too often, but they know they're here, they expect to see them, they leave them alone, they get along, and it's been going on for years. My name's Jim Charneski. I'm a field researcher for Bigfoot Field Research Organization, and I live in western North Carolina. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and as a kid growing up, every week or two there was always something in the back of the newspaper about somebody seeing something running through the fields, and I always thought it'd be interesting to hunt for Bigfoot. And about 12 years ago, I thought, well, while I'm still young enough to get out in the woods and do it, I'd better get started. And at that time, I found the BFRO, and they were one of the few organizations that were interested in true research at that time. And I started going on trips with them, and it took me about 3 years until I was able to become an investigator with them. There's several areas around here that have multiple sightings each year. It's not quite as heavy density as other parts of the state, but basically along the Tennessee-North Carolina border, we get a lot of reports on down towards the South Carolina border. I have a sneaking suspicion from my research that they tend to migrate up here to the higher elevations in the hottest part of the summer. And then, it's a short day or two walk to get down off the mountain into South Carolina or parts of Tennessee that would have a little milder winter than up here in the mountains. For the last hundreds of years or longer, people have been seeing something. And I don't think it's all misidentifications and hoaxes. I think there's usually a little bit of credibility for each of the lore and folk tales from many different cultures. I would have to think that over the centuries that people are seeing something and they're describing what they see to the best of their ability at the time. So I give some credence to the folklore and other stories from Native Americans and the early settlers.
Since the days of Judaculla, others have spoken tales of a large, hair-covered creature that roams the woods. The locals of Haywood County call him Boojum, a being that lived in the Balsams and had an obsession with gemstones. Boojum had an eye for finding the rubies and emeralds that are scattered throughout the mountains. He would then hide them in old liquor jugs, left behind by moonshiners, and stash them away in the many caves that lie scattered beneath the mountains. In those days, it was common for people to venture down to the creek to bathe. There was a young woman by the name of Annie who had encountered Boojum while taking a bath. She locked eyes with the creature, but instead of running away, she became lost in the gaze of his sad eyes. In time, Annie had fallen in love with Boojum, eventually leaving her life behind to live with him in the wild. They lived together for quite a while, but Boojum still loved venturing out into the forest in search of his beloved gemstones. While he was off on his many long trips, Annie would grow lonesome and concerned, Sometimes she would set out in search of Boojum, calling out to him by mimicking the hooting sound that he made. According to a folklorist by the name of John Paris, this became the origin of the term Hootenanny or Hootenanny, which refers to a loud gathering or party. In August of 2019, a small group of people entered the woods near Fontana Lake to investigate several strange reports that had come from the area. The group spent several days exploring, placing digital audio recorders and trail cameras. On the second day of the trip, one of the group began noticing something odd.
Almost 82 inches tall is where the break is. Almost 7 feet off the ground.
He caught my eye. I'm like, what the hell? About 7 again? That's pretty close. 6 6. Oh, 6 hours. Oh. Oh, I threw it. Okay. I was looking at something.
Oh, yeah, it's roughly about the same time. In general,
Is it going up or down?
What is here that would hit that and cause that to break like that?
Nothing.
There's nothing on the ground.
That was a very interesting one. It was a little bit smaller than some of the other ones that I've seen, but that was still enough girth and size to the tree that it took considerable force to do it. You seem to have done a good job of researching the area around it, looking for any other evidence that could have caused it. Following up with the dimensions and how it was twisted, which is very good. Also the height, anything that's twisted 6, 7, 8 feet off the ground is going to limit what could do that as well. I don't see somebody carrying a ladder out in the woods to twist something 7 feet off the ground. That would take considerable effort. But if you find branches broken or branches broken along a trail, that it's obvious that something is trying to keep the branches out of their way so that they can move quickly up and down the trail. I'd say, that's a good possibility that you may have found a hunting spot or an area where they're trying to move quickly. I've seen some very impressive tree twist that whatever did it had to have just immense strength. I've seen a tree break over near Uwharrie, east of Charlotte, that was a log about that big around, twisted from about 3 foot to 6 foot. It was green. It was twisted so many times that it splintered, and the fragmented splinters of that twist were about 36 inches long. Huge. Nothing else around it was disturbed. The investigator that found it, cut it off and has it in his living room. Branches 4 or 5, almost 6 inches in diameter, twisted probably 25, 30 times to the point that, they splintered and fractured like you and I would twist a dandelion. What can do that in the woods, I think, is very few and far between. A bear certainly can't do that. They may have the strength, but they don't have the dexterity in their paws or hands to do something like that. Some of the ones that I've seen, I don't know a human alive that is that strong. Some of the structures I kind of have to question until they're thoroughly researched. If there's a windstorm and branches fall and get tangled up, okay, you can say that's natural. If you find a structure that is made out of wood and there's no trees nearby out of that wood, meaning that the limbs and the wood had to be moved physically, it's like, all right, that adds a little more credibility to it. On the other hand, with the number of people doing bushcraft things and hoaxes out in the woods, just because a limb is moved several hundred yards or further doesn't necessarily mean it's a Bigfoot, but each one of those, I think, has to be investigated carefully on a per case basis.
Right.
No, I'm just thrilled that Bigfoot research is increasing worldwide. And it's not just the tabloid stuff that was so popular even 20 years ago. The amount of true research going on is really surprising. And with the BFRO that started in 1995, we've collected a little over 72,000 reported sightings in this country that we're trying to investigate all of them. People are seeing something. It's not all hoaxes and pranks by your next door neighbor or hunting buddy. So if we can add just a little bit more knowledge, I think that's fabulous.
There is one more thing that the legends all seem to have in common: the presence of caves.
You went under the rock, you right there. I want to say that one opens up too, but it's wet.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening.
Let me see. That's the big cave, though.
That's the big one.
Like, I wouldn't belly crawl, but. Huh? Huh?
I think I got that.
From the late 1800s on up to the 20s and 30s, a lot of the family farms and areas here had their own little mines. This is one of the richest gemstone and mineral areas on the East Coast. So this was a very pretty depressed financial area. But any of the family farms, if somebody came to town and said, if you've got this rock on your farm, you dig it up, I'll give you money, they did it. And a lot of the older family farms that I've visited had little mines, and little, I'm meaning sometimes they were just barely big enough to climb into, just a depression dug back into the mountain. Whether it's for gemstones or uranium or any of the other minerals. I think they're opportunists. If they find a little cave or nook that they can climb into for shelter and be safe sleeping, I think they'd use it.
In North Carolina, there are an estimated 900 caves and caverns, many of which are off limits to the public. A multitude of life calls these subterranean voids home. Ever since the words Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and Yeti were introduced to the world at large, countless people have taken it upon themselves to seek answers to their questions. Today, there are even more who have volunteered to leap down the rabbit hole into the mysterious caverns below in search of a real-life giant. But what if you actually find one?
Number one, don't panic. One of the most difficult things to do in the woods, especially if you're out by yourself late at night, a chipmunk can sound like a bull elephant going through the woods. And your imagination can be the worst part from time to time, because your imagination can run wild before you turn a flashlight on and see what it is. But also get to know the area that you're in, know what normal sounds you should hear there. And if you do have something that seems to be following you in the woods or throwing rocks or pebbles at you, or you hear grunts or whistles or anything like that, relax a little bit, listen to what you're hearing, try and eliminate everything else. And I don't think that unless you corner one or shoot one or injure one, I don't think they're a threat. They're very good at intimidation. And chances are they know you were there before they made themselves known. But if they want you out of an area, they can intimidate you till the hair's standing up on the back of your neck and you'll want to go. But, just be careful. It's better to go with a couple people than one person out wandering around at night by themselves. Have some form of communication. Radios, you can get those fairly cheap. So that even if the other people that are with you are 50 yards away, you can still talk and say, I heard it, it was over to the left, what did you hear? But relax a little bit, pay attention to what your surroundings are, and have fun with it, but be careful. Another encounter that I had was we got a report from some trout fishermen that had been hiking up to a wild trout stream, and they'd hiked about 5 miles back into the woods and camped there for 2 nights. And the first night they heard something circling their camp. They could hear footsteps, they could hear some snorting. They weren't sure what it was. The second night they heard that again, and then something started throwing rocks and acorns at their tent. They got spooked and headed out and called us, and a group of us investigators headed down there and backpacked into where the fishermen had been. First night there, we didn't hear or see anything. So we decided to move camp. And right above where the trout fishermen had been, at the top of the ridge, there was 3 ridges that joined in one spot. And there was game trails along the tops of those ridges. So we camped at the top where those 3 trails met. And we sat there, and each one looking over the other person's shoulder so they could see down the game trail. And one of the guys said, Jim, grab your night vision, there's one behind you. And in the time it took for me to reach down, get my night vision, turn, and look at it, it had stepped off the trail behind a very large fallen pine tree. And unfortunately, this was an older Generation 1 night vision, so I couldn't record from it. But I sat there and watched him for probably 6 or 7 minutes. Shoulders about 4 feet wide. I could see him from about the waist up. And he'd stick his head up and shoulders up above the log and watch us. And very slowly sink down behind the log, move to a different spot on the log, and pop his head and body up to watch us from a different angle. And after he did that for the 5 or 6 minutes, we could hear, one of the guys had a bionic ear with us, and we could hear it walking, circling down below us in the ravine. And then it walked on out away from us. The next morning, you could see in the leaf litter on the forest floor where it had walked down the ravine. And then at the bottom of the ravine in some gravel, you could see where something had walked across it. And there was about 14-inch footprints down there. Nothing that we could do a casting of, but it was obvious where something had walked across the gravel. You don't have to spend a lot of money to start doing some Bigfoot research. All the gadgets and the cameras and recording equipment are nice, but it doesn't take long. If you find somebody that has some experience that can tell you what to look for, what to listen for, an idea of the terrain to go to, it doesn't take long to learn that. And once you do, I think you'll be amazed at how often you do hear things that are out of the norm. Lots of different organizations from state to state that are happy to have new members that will come and ask questions, and have them show you what to look for.
Why is it important for the search to continue? Why the fascination with something that many believe is nothing more than tall tales?
To think that we're the only hominoid species on the planet is a big jump. All the different cultures that have histories, folklore, stories of the little people on up to giants. I think there's something to it. I think they're just about as curious as we are. If we can find out a little more about them, their habits, behaviors, I think it's worth, just for our background and history, to see what we can learn. And if we can prove that some of the folklore and stories that we've been hearing for centuries are true, that's another little bonus of the world that we live in.
Whatever direction life takes upon your journey, there are a few things that can be taken from the legend of Judaculla. This earth that we call home is a magical, mysterious place that is filled with wonder and beauty. Reconnecting with nature has a way of replenishing your soul after being taxed by the daily grind of life. However, there are still plenty of untamed places all around us, where the known and the unknown live and breathe together. It is the last of the wilds, and we should follow the teachings that were handed down long ago and be the caretakers.
it's lying